As I started working with the sharks, I started realizing that the reasons why I had gone into anorexia and bulimia were dictated by the pressure of a society that I actually didn't have to listen to. And the sharks taught me what are, I think, more important values that we should pay attention to, which is our strength of the body and the strength of the mind and the resolutions to do things that make us happy. And at the same time, if we can, to help others to grow and to be in tune with what is around us.
Hi, it's Steph. And that was the voice of Cristina Zenato. More than 25 years ago, she journeyed to the Bahamas to learn how to scuba dive and immediately made the Bahamas her home and diving her life. You'll hear more about where her story began and how she arrived to be a PADI course director, a cave diving instructor, and a specialist in shark diving and shark behavior. Look through the images on her webpage, and you'll immediately feel the calm and stillness of her underwater world, and you'll get a glimpse into the comfort she feels there in the company of sharks. Educating others is a huge part of Cristina's work. She's an active and prolific speaker and also an inducted member of the Women Divers Hall of Fame, the Explorers Club, the Ocean Artists Society, and a recipient of the esteemed Platinum Pro 5000. Cristina is the founder of a 501c3 called People of the Water. It's designed to widen the distribution of training, education, research, and studies relating to water, oceans, and environmental issues affecting both the people and the animals of these environments. You are going to love her. Before we dive in, real quick, thank you all for being here, for listening and supporting the podcast. Thank you for your ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts, and please keep them coming. And to my Patreon supporters, I can't thank you enough for believing in this podcast and choosing to back it. All right, get out your fins, snorkel, mask, and adopt an aquatic state of mind. This is the Another Door Opens podcast, and I'm your host, Stephanie Himango. Here is Cristina Zenato.
My name is Cristina Zenato, Cristina
And where are you talking to me from today?
I am talking to you from Freeport, Grand Bahama in the Bahamas.
If someone caught up with you as you were just about to get in the ocean with your scuba gear on, and they asked you what you do, what would you say?
I am a scuba professional.
And what does that entail? I know that you have a lot of sharks in your world. I know that you have caves in your world.
I am a shark behaviorist and conservationist as well as diver. I am a cave diving instructor and trainer and explorer as well as the technical instructor, mixed gas, rebreather instructor, and I'm a course director. So I'm an instructor trainer for recreational diving. I train other people how to teach. And then all the things related with water from I can install moorings, repair regulators, blend the gases, and all the rest.
Did you study marine biology or other marine-based sciences?
Actually, my background is not in marine biology. My studies were in literature, art, history, geography, and primarily languages. I studied about 5 different languages. English, French, German, and Spanish, and my mother language is Italian.
And I want to get to your background in a minute, but first I just want to ask you, given that background, what is it about sharks that attracted you? How did you go from that base to sharks?
Sharks had always fascinated me. When I was 8 years old, I saw this movie, which I'm pretty sure it was a little bit kitsch, but it was a guy that will go to any extent to protect the sharks. And he was friends with them. And these we're talking about 1978, 1979 on the tail end of Jaws. And as a child, for me, it was fascinating that there was someone that will risk everything and anything to protect his sharks friends. And so I decided that I will be as well an underwater scuba ranger who would have sharks for friends, and I will just roam around the oceans, protecting the oceans from the damages of people with my sharks in tow.
An underwater scuba ranger.
I wanted to be a guardian of the oceans. I imagined my job to be endless time in the water. I didn't realize, obviously, that physically we can't do that. There's limitations to our capabilities of being always submerged. But in my dream as a child, I was endlessly in the water. My mom could not tell me to come out of the water because my lips were purple and I was shivering. And I will go around the oceans, imagine seeing people doing certain things, like a ranger, park ranger, go up to them and say, "No, sorry, sir, you can't do that," and protect the world, oceans and reefs.
When many people think of life beneath the sea or hear the word shark, they think fear and they think danger. Can we talk about fear and danger for a minute? And are there any myths you want to dispel?
Fear is usually the result of something for us unknown, or sometimes it's triggered by our background. It is a survival reaction if you think about it, right? We're fearful of something and that allows us to survive. So in a certain way, it is helpful. We are fearful of a raging fire and we run away from the fire. And that is good. We don't run towards the fire like firefighters do. They actually have to go through some training to change their mindset. But fear can also be based on perceived dangers and on altered, basically, perceptions of what is our reality. And unfortunately, the one of sharks, I think, has been modified primarily by not only the movies that everybody mentions, but in my personal opinion, by the news, the medias, and how sometimes the negative encounters between sharks and humans are portrayed. They fail, though, to portray how negatives are the encounters for the sharks every time they meet humans. And we're talking about 1 into the 100 millions difference. And that's something that triggers a fear that is unjustified. So sharks suffer a negative reputation due to our unwillingness sometimes to really sit and understand their true nature, understand how many there are, how many species, and how they live and work, and how we can actually coexist with them.
You know, I think of a puppy, for example, and many of us have access to them. So that's one thing. You know, we can interact with them and have an understanding based on experience. But it's easy to imagine a warm emotional reaction to something like a puppy. Do you have a warm emotional reaction to sharks?
Absolutely. When I see my sharks, I am happy. I'm excited to see them. And like the emotional reactions and connections that I have to the animals on land, I worry about them. I want to make sure that they're okay. I wish actually I could do more because obviously these are wild animals. So it's not that if I see a shark that is injured or sick or damaged, I can say, "Hey, hop in the car. I will take you to the vet." So there's also limitations in what I can do for them. But for me, I call them my babies. Mm-hmm. The Caribbean reef sharks I work with, I call them my babies. All the other sharks, I still very much love them and respect them. I might not have the same emotional connection, but I still have the same appreciation for who they are and how important they are for us. And I still seek to experience and explore, obviously, other sharks and other kind of interactions.
Quick quiz. How many different kinds of sharks do you think exist? Do you have a number in mind? Okay, here's the answer.
There are over 520 species of sharks.
And generally, do you work with a certain type of shark?
I primarily work with Caribbean reef sharks and some of the nurse sharks that join into the dive, but I also worked and dived with some of what people consider the biggest ones, from tiger sharks to bulls, great whites, blues, makos, black tips, white tips, oceanic white tip, great hammerheads, just to name a few that I've been able to dive with, interact with, or just share the ocean with.
And what kind of special gear do you wear?
It depends what we're talking about. When I'm underwater working with my crew, because I also bring food as a positive reinforcement, I wear a chain suit. It's a stainless steel chain suit made by Neptunic. When I'm scuba diving and I'm not carrying food for positive reinforcement, or I'm not seeking interaction at that level, I don't wear any protection. I just wear my wetsuit and my scuba gear.
I have watched you online interact with a lot of different elementary school classrooms when it comes to shark information and education, and you really seem to light up when you talk with kids, answering their wonderful questions. What kind of thrill do you get when you can actually educate people at all levels, from elementary to the elderly?
For me, the excitement of sharing sharks and seeing the changes in people is maybe one of the best rewarding part of my job. I believe in what it's called the star thrower story, that each one of us can make a difference for someone, and we don't need to change the world to make someone happy, but we can just change their world to make them happy. And so every time I can change someone's perception of sharks, every time I receive a message or the kids seem to understand, and then they come back and say, I want to protect sharks, I think about the ripple effect that this is going to have. And I'm like, okay, I touched one person. Now they can touch one more person. And then by touching one more person, maybe I end up touching 100. So I really believe in the power of the one. And if each one of us did something, then it becomes the power of the multiple. I usually tell people the oceans is made of drops, but they're all cohesive together, and that's how they make the water. They don't stand as a single drops.
You heard Cristina mention just now the star thrower story. I asked if she could share it in more detail in case you haven't heard it, or perhaps you would just enjoy hearing it again. I, for one, could hear this story every day and never tire of it.
It's an old story. It's an old poetry to which I refer to as being used then later as really as a motivational part. And it's a short story. The modern short version talks about an old man walking the beach and notices this young man throwing something in the water. And as he approaches, I notices the young man is throwing starfish into the water. And when he inquires about that, the young man says, well, they're stranded from the low tide, so I'm putting them back in the water. And so the old man is very kind of like thoughtful and says, well, there's miles and miles of beach here, and there's plenty of other beaches, and there's thousands of starfish. You will never make a difference. And so the young man pauses as he has a starfish in his hands, and then puts the starfish in the water, looks up and says, well, I made a difference for that one. In the original poem, it continues, and then it says, and then there were others. And that is the part that for me is important into education. Is not just what we do, but how we transfer to someone else, so that the others, the younger ones who are coming up behind us, can actually join into the work and into the forces, and maybe they will reduce their damage that we have left for them to deal with, and hopefully heal part of the damage that we keep leaving for them.
And that just makes me think of the importance of communication. How do you communicate with sharks, and what has that communication taught you about communication in general?
Communication for me is very important, as you can tell from the wanting to study languages. With sharks, it was a matter of understanding which language they speak. For quite some time as I was growing up, one of the things that you hear quite a lot, even in science class, is that animals are rated into their capability of communication, and then how humans are so different because we have the spoken word and we can create thoughts, and we are the only sentient beings. If we look at animals, and we know that from looking at our puppy, they do communicate. They just don't speak the same language. And funny enough, they understand us more than we understand them. Mm-hmm. So with sharks, I started to listen, which is what you do when you meet someone and you want to start to learn about them. You actually listen about them. Their communication comes in body behavior, in attitudes depending on the day and the weather. And so as I start listening to that, I start basically realizing the differences between one animal and the other, from one day to the other, who is shy, who is more, intense, and who is learning fast and who is learning slow.
So there's so much communication beyond the spoken word.
Yes, there's plenty of communication beyond the spoken word. It's just a matter of being able to kind of like be aware of that. And I have to admit, one of the best lessons I received was through a dear friend of mine, Thomas Jacob, and he is from the deaf community. It actually really, really nailed the concept that yes, communication is way well beyond the spoken word. and how, American Sign Language uses the body, uses the facial expressions, and uses actually the ability of looking at each other. They're the most attentive people that I ever communicated with.
And you shared with me a quote a friend from, I think, Poland shared with you that I thought was so profound. Can you share that?
Yes. My friend Arek is a Polish engineer and extremely intelligent person. I would say genius compared to what his brain works. And one of the things that he always told me, we communicated in English. He told me, I have an accent in my voice. I don't have an accent in my brain, meaning his English was not fluent and his English at times was incorrect, but that does not make him incapable of being the person that he actually was. And so sometimes I always try to teach people. I tell them, when they said, oh, so sorry for my English. And I tell them, listen, it's way better than the way I speak your languages, which chances are if you're communicating in English is I can't speak your language. At least you can speak English. So thank you very much for the effort.
I think Cristina's perspective on communication is something we can all absorb, whether it's through exposure to animals or, say, through traveling the world, if we can. In those ways, we can learn about others and their ways of life and living and thinking and doing and being, and it just expands our world.
Yes. So I was born in the northern part of Italy. My mom is from the northwest, a tiny corner next to France, right on the ocean called Liguria. And my dad is from the city of Romeo and Juliet, Verona. A very, very early age, when I was an infant, my mom flew to Africa and joined my dad for what was basically my childhood and part of my teen times to live and work there together. So I grew up in Central Africa between the savannah and the rainforest. It was an open air life that some people might frown and think, well, what does it have to do with the ocean? At the time, not much, but it was a free life. It was in contact with nature life, but it was also life that taught me about the respect and understanding of wild. We were in the middle of the rainforest. You had to pay attention to the black mambas, to the green mambas, to the gorillas, but it was not in a destructive way. It was we're here in the forest together. We need to share this space. Let's try not to step on each other's toes. Here's what you need to learn about snakes. Here's what you need to learn about gorilla. Here's what you need to learn should this happen. So it was not about just eliminate everything to make this safe, which is sometimes what people say about sharks. But then my dad and my mom are from the ocean. My dad had a military background and these beautiful black and white pictures from his past. And so every free moment we had, even when we drove down from the rainforest, we would drive to the wild coast of the Republic of Congo and go swimming in the Atlantic Ocean. And then when we went back to Italy, I would be either in the lake or I will be in the Mediterranean Sea. So I grew up with fins, mask, and snorkel since I was literally able to walk. Chances are I was able to swim before I was able to walk.
And then you ended up back in Italy as a teenager. And how long did you stay there before you went to the Bahamas?
I was in Italy between 14 and 22 with a break of a year at 19 or 20 where I lived in Germany and 6 months in France. So I lived a year in Germany and 6 months in France. But the rest of the time I was in Italy. At 22, I came here on vacation here in Freeport, Grand Bahama, to learn how to scuba dive. Fell in love with the place above and below the water. I realized I had sharks on the first dive. We had sharks. And when I surfaced and I said, you have sharks? The instructor looked at me like, yes, of course we have sharks. I mean, what a question. and I decided to come back. I was fortunate during my vacation. The people that I was hanging out with found out I was speaking the languages, and the hotel I was staying in was looking for someone to work at the front desk who could speak the different languages for the different customers. That was not English. And so I walked into the manager's office. I still remember I had a bathing suit and a sarong, and I was bare feet because I was on vacation. And I said, I'm here for the interview. And she did a mix of Italian, French, German, English. And she said, when can you come back? And I looked at her. I had not spoken to anyone because we were talking about 1994. So it's not that I could text my mom or And I said, I have a week vacation and then I need 10 days in Italy to sort a few things out. So I finished my vacation, flew back to Italy, and in 10 days, quit my job, packed some stuff in boxes, left it at when then will become my ex-boyfriend home, gave the car back to my parents, and packed my bags again for the Bahamas.
Were you aware of your own wanderlust as a young woman? And did you ever feel conflicted or guilty in going a rather non-traditional route and just moving away from everyone you knew and loved to satisfy a knowing or a desire for exploration in yourself?
I guess as an individual, you don't look into the mirror and go, oh yeah, I'm a wanderlust person. I didn't know that. People saw that in me, but I didn't really think I was something unique or from that point of view. I never felt guilty for following what has and is to this day my true passion, my true desire. Did I pay a price for it? Absolutely. Would I change what I did? Not necessarily the steps of what I did. Maybe I would change a little bit the communication with my parents. Maybe I would change a couple of things here and there. But all in all, no, I have no regrets and I have no guilt. And I don't see why we should be feeling guilty for following something that doesn't harm anyone else and makes us happy.
I could not agree more. I think sometimes too, when we go away from all that is known, we get quiet with ourselves and we have epiphanies we would not have had under the umbrella or mist of familiarity and surrounding expectations. Were there any notable epiphanies that you had in those early years there as a young woman?
There were quite a lot. I think the first one that was a part of my background, and I say this with all the love for my dad and for my culture, but it was like that women are not supposed to fill in the blanks. Or women only are going to do these jobs and fill in the blanks. And this is part of maybe the age and mentality. I remember overhearing my dad saying, oh, no, Christina's not going to go to university because women don't need to go to university. And it was an innocent comment. It was not mean. It was part of who he was in his culture as a man. But we don't realize how much those comments can chisel someone's self-awareness. It's only when you step away from it and you realize that it says, no, excuse me, but women can be scuba divers and women can drive boats and women can actually grab wrenches and be greases in an engine block and do all of these things. And it's okay to do that. It doesn't diminish my femininity. Well, that was the other part, right? So you're a tomboy. It's like, no, maybe I'm not ribbons and glitter, but I am a feminine woman. So one should not exclude the other. So one of the first epiphanies for me was I can actually be the whole of it. I don't need to be labeled. And it doesn't mean because I'm doing this, that makes me necessarily this or that. The other part that I had for me as a person then coming and working here and going in the water with the sharks was the realization that values are different once brought back to complete nature. I came here as a person with eating behavioral problems. I had developed anorexia in my late teens and then dragged it into bulimia. And when I left Italy to come here, my bulimia was still fairly present. And then as I started working with the sharks, I started realizing that the reasons why I had gone into anorexia and bulimia were dictated by the pressure of a society that I actually didn't have to listen to. And the sharks taught me what are, I think, more important values that we should pay attention to, which is our strength of the body and the strength of the mind and the resolutions to do things that make us happy. And at the same time, if we can, to help others to grow and to be in tune with what is around us. I think we're lost quite a lot of contact with nature as humans. I mean, I'm guilty of that, right? We live in these artificial environments and kind of like move away from what are really like the basics of being a human in a certain way. So for me, the epiphany with the sharks was also that. It's like, yeah, don't worry about if you're now size 2, at size 4 or 6 or whatever the size is. Your legs can actually take you to the ocean with the sharks. Your legs can actually take you cave diving. And so the values change into, I'm going to be healthy. I'm not going to worry about what society tells me how I should look like in order to be considered. Because that goes back to the feminine part, right? Oh, women have to look in a certain way. God forbid women have gray hair. God forbid and women have wrinkles, and we can fill in the boxes till the end of our days. And so to me, that taught me different values on what to look for. And I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with staying fit. There's nothing wrong with wanting to look beautiful. There's nothing wrong with coloring our hair. Those are all part of that. But it taught me that it should not be the core of our existence.
Do you feel like there are other lessons you can share with us that you have learned from the sharks, or maybe even some details about sharks that you just wish we knew? Because I know that being an educator is a large part of who you are.
The biggest thing we need to learn about sharks is they're extremely vulnerable. He's one of the most vulnerable animals on this planet from our presence. They are created by nature, evolved into nature as a slow reproduction, later sexual maturity, as small litters. So every time humans interfere with their lives, interfere with their environment, we absolutely diminish their chances to survive. And we don't realize the impact that we have on sharks because it's a little bit out of sight, out of mind. They're out in the oceans and we don't really know the extent of how many we kill. But there's an estimate of 80 to 100 million sharks per year are killed by human activities, including finning, overfishing, bycatch. There's quite a lot that goes into sharks. That will be, as an educator, let's start learning about the different species of sharks, how important they are for the balance of the ocean, how important they are also if some people out there are fish eaters. For that fish to be healthy, we need the sharks. So the correlations and the coexistence that we need with them. The lessons I've learned from them, I actually have a presentation called the Shark Wisdom.
Oh,
and it's
I
like
love
lesson
that.
learned from sharks. One of the main one that for me was very important, and we go back to the same thing, is do not stereotype. Let's stop slapping labels on ourselves, or let's stop slapping labels on other people and live within the confinements of this box, of this perception. So do not judge the book by the cover. We can translate it into that. But sharks is, when you say sharks, people go, oh, Jaws. And I'm like, well, no. Did you know the smallest shark in the world is the size of a pen?
Wow. No.
Yeah. Did you know the biggest shark in the world is the size of a bus and feeds on plankton? So it's actually called the whale shark. And so let's not stereotype and say shark and think Jaws. If we kind of like me saying that all birds are black, all birds sing beautifully, and all birds can fly. And it's like, well, none of the three is correct. So the other one that I learned from shark that I think is very important is select your bite.
What does that mean?
Well, so here it comes again from the perception that as soon as you hit the water, the sharks will be there going chomp, 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 chomp. Sharks are actually very selective in their attempts to find the prey, and they're even more selective in approaching a prey because there is to be considered what is called a return on investment. So if I'm a shark and I'm going after a prey, that's going to include and require a lot of energy and includes a risk, right? Because I'm approaching a prey that can defend itself or can swim away from me or can turn around and actually injure me. I have to be careful in when and how I will select to go after this prey. So select your bites, because if I miss it, then I'm going to be starving even more with even less energy and nothing in my stomach. And if I get injured, that's even more dangerous in nature. So as humans, is select your bites. Pick those things that are really worth working for. Put what you have to put into them, right? But don't worry about all the other ones. Don't just go around the oceans trying to bite down on everything and anything, because it will waste your energy and it will not have the return on investment. Which, what does it mean? It means is sometimes you need to learn to let go. Sometimes you have to learn to say, no, this one is not for me. I'm not going to do this because it's just not going to be worth my energy. So you can turn that into saying, instead of engaging with a certain kind of people that are extremely negative, you can make a conscientious choice of saying, I will not engage into that.
Mm-hmm.
And that will save my energy, my positivity, my interactions for those people that actually deserve my energy and my educational power.
Mm-hmm. How much more nature do you think we all need in our lives, especially during this time of a global pandemic?
You might think I'm crazy. I think people should stop living in big cities. If we want to talk about nature, I think we need hours per day in nature. And I noticed living the life I live, I did not realize how different my life and, the one of people in these areas do. But I remember a few years back, I went to a dive show in Portland. It was in the middle of the winter. And I remember I've boarded the flight from here, arrived. It was something like minus or something unforgivable. We went in the taxi. Well, I have a coat and I have shoes, but it's not that I have something for that kind of winter. So I have a couple of things and put them on. And we arrived and went in a taxi. It was me and my colleague. I drove to the hotel, and then the hotel has like a hamster run, like a little gerber run that you can go through the run to get to the convention center. And then you gerber run back to the hotel with all the indoor dining and all the indoor events and all the indoor cocktails and you name it. And by the third morning, I woke up and I realized I haven't taken in a fresh breath of air. And I was missing it. And I'm like, well, these people live like this. And then I remember Northern European. They always say, there's no such a thing as bad weather. There's only bad clothing. So I bundled up as much as I could with what I had. And I went out. I'm pretty sure it was minus 11 or something like that. It was just, but it was a crystal clear day. And I was out for 15, 20 minutes. I went walking a little bit just to breathe in the fresh air. And it was like 3 days and I was already missing it.
Your awareness is heightened.
Yes. During the COVID, we couldn't move. So I would go and sit outside in the garden. I remember when I was just sitting there and all of a sudden, must have been an hour or something, I noticed a movement with a corner of my eyes and I caught this entire mating dance. It was like a lizard making a mating neck movement. I'm like, oh, where's your girl? And I started looking and because I was so still, I saw the girl and then I saw another male and then I saw them fighting. And so just sometimes I think we need to go outside. It doesn't have to be extreme adventures, but just sit somewhere and watch how nature evolves around us. And I think it's going to help a lot and teach us some lessons no matter where we are and what nature we like to connect with.
One of the reasons I love following you on social media is not only are your underwater images just transporting, but you also do a lot of educating, and I learn a lot by following you. And so before I ask the final question, I just want to ask where people can find you and follow you on your different social media platforms.
Well, thank you for those words. It's very kind. So I am on all the social media. So I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram as Cristina Zenato, CRISTINAZENATO. And then my website, I know this is going to be very complicated, is www.cristinazenato.com. And so they can come and see most of the things I do. The website is more about the things I teach. So the courses, how they can hire me as a diving professional. The social media is to see more the educational part. And then they can see part of the educational, the exploration, education, and conservation work I do through my nonprofit. It's called People of the Water, and they can go to POWnonprofit.org. And there we list the projects we've been involved with, the future projects, some of the work we do. People of the Water is also on Instagram and Facebook, and that's we post more of the updates.
Wonderful. And if there's anyone listening who is a teacher and wants to be able to Zoom with you with classes, is that something that you're still open to?
Yes, absolutely. I just did one this morning with the National Museum of Kenya.
Kenya.
Absolutely. Yes. I love being able to list the countries that I've been able to reach. I even had 2 TV interviews with Georgia, not Georgia in the United States, Georgia in the European
former
part of
USSR.
the world. Yes, the former USSR. They can reach me through my website on the contact button. And then we just set up a time and I'll do the Zoom with presentation. The age doesn't really matter. I can adapt to all the ages I've done from kindergarten all the way to university. And I've covered all tops from basic sharks all to one of the most recent one I did was actually facing your fears. So how we face our fears through the work that I do with sharks and caves and apply it to our lives now in a COVID time.
So fascinating. The final question I always like to ask is, what do the words "another door opens" mean to you, if anything?
Another door opens is, I think, right now, the best summary of what we should look at COVID as. Don't get me wrong, it's been a time of losses, a time of financial stress, a time of uncertainty. But if I look at my personal situation, which has been very uncertain financially and obviously work-wise, because I work with tourism, many doors open. I wouldn't have been able to do the hundreds of presentations and reach the hundreds of Zoom classrooms that I've done this far. I wouldn't have been able to adopt a new puppy. So another door opens is the way at which we should look at life. And when something stressful and something fearful hits us, we should look at it not as a negative factor, maybe as a challenge. And once I start looking at it as a challenge, this is something that in our basic nature, it will instigate us to move forward, to actually fight for it rather than run away from it.
Thank you, Cristina Zenato, for sharing some of your story and some personal insights learned from sharks, caves, and the magic beneath the sea. Make sure you follow Cristina on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Cristina Zenato, and on her website by the same name, spelled CRISTINAZENATO.com. I'm going to be posting some of Cristina's aquatic photos on my social media pages too, so you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Steph Hamango and at Podcastado. That's short for podcast, ADO for Another Door Opens. The Another Door Opens podcast is about open doors, open hearts, and open minds, and now open water. Through this podcast and the people I talk with here, I feel it's one small way we can learn from each other while celebrating differences and finding common ground at the same time. And so maybe we can feel a tiny bit more connected. Please take a minute to share this episode with one friend who came to mind while you listened, and rate and review it on Apple Podcasts. Again, to my Patreon supporters, thank you for believing in this podcast and backing it. If you'd like to be part of that group where you can get some other little behind the scenes pictures and stuff like that, check it out at patreon.com/anotherdooropens, and you can be a member for as little as $1 a month. Those Another Door Opens drum beats you hear, those were made by the amazing Eric Brown. And that is this week's episode of the Another Door Opens podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I'll see you next time. Love you. Bye.